have you ever stopped to think about what is actually happening in your head right now, like as you listen to this?
It's, probably not what most people think.
Right. Because the standard assumption is that you are basically a passenger. Your ears pick up sound waves and, they translate those waves into electrical signals, and those signals just get beamed into the dark, silent vault of your skull.
Yeah, like you're just sitting in a movie theater.
Exactly. Your
Huh.
brain is supposedly acting like this high-end processor, just, well, sitting there in the dark, decoding the feed, building a picture of reality for you to passively consume.
It is, the ultimate spectator sport. That model assumes your nervous system is essentially a sponge. It's just soaking up data from a world that already exists in this perfectly labeled, prepackaged state, just waiting to be perceived.
Okay, let's unpack this, because what if that entire premise is entirely backwards? Today, we are taking a deep dive into well, a tectonic shift in cognitive science.
A very necessary shift, honestly.
For sure. We are looking at this brilliant, highly debated blog post on predictive processing by the philosopher Andy Clark from the Brains blog. And, oh man, it's very heated comment section too.
The comments are where the real fight happens.
Oh, absolutely. And we are pairing that with a comprehensive overview of a philosophical earthquake called inactivism. We are basically trying to rescue you from the idea that you're just observing reality and show you how your physical actions and your environment are actively, literally constructing your mind.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is really the death knell for centuries of Cartesian dualism.
Right, the whole mind-body split thing.
Exactly. That old philosophical framework that treated the mind as this ghostly, ethereal thing hovering above the mechanical hardware of the body. What these sources were to focus is an intensely action-oriented reality. The mind isn't something you have, it's something you do.
So to understand how we get there, we really need to look at predictive processing first. The baseline concept here completely ditches the whole passive sponge idea. Instead, it argues that your brain is a proactive prediction engine. It doesn't wait for sensory signals to arrive. It is constantly generating predictions about what it's going to, hear, see, and feel next, actively pushing those predictions down through your nervous system.
And that underlying concept has gained massive traction. But there is an older, more conservative way that scientists interpret it, which is known as conservative predictive processing, or CPP.
The more traditional take.
Right. In the conservative framework, the brain is essentially a statistician trapped in a skull. It receives incoming sensory data, and it tries to select the best possible hypothesis to explain that data based on its prior knowledge.
So it's trying to build a perfect internal mirror of nature, right?
That is the goal of the conservative model, yes. It wants to recapitulate the causal structure of the outside world on the inside. And this brings us to a really critical term in this field, which is prediction error.
Which sounds like a computer crashing, but it's not.
Right, no. In conservative predictive processing, a prediction error is simply information that arrives at the senses that is not yet explained by the brain's current hypothesis.
It's an anomaly.
Exactly. It's data that doesn't fit the internal mirror.
That makes me think of like a scientist locked inside a windowless room. And people keep sliding these incredibly complex spreadsheets of raw data under the door.
That's a great way to picture it.
Yeah, and this poor scientist is frantically trying to build a perfectly accurate 3D scale model of the outside world using nothing but those spreadsheets. And whenever the model doesn't match the new data, boom, prediction error. They have to furiously recalculate and update the model.
Which is a massive cognitive load.
Yeah, I have to say that sounds exhausting. I mean, it still leaves the brain acting as a passive, hyper-anxious observer, just tweaking models all day.
And that exact tension is what drove Andy Clark and his contemporaries to look for a more dynamic explanation. Because they realized that trying to compute a perfect replica of the universe is, well, biologically implausible.
It just takes too much juice.
Way too much energy. Which leads us to the more revolutionary side of this theory, which is radical predictive processing, or RPP.
And this is where action finally enters the chat.
Radically so. RPP builds heavily on Carl Friston's concept of active inference.
Okay, what does that mean practically?
Well, active inference suggests there are actually two ways to minimize a prediction error. The conservative way is to change your internal prediction to match the world. The radical way is to alter the sensory signal itself to fit your prediction.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and the only way you can alter a sensory signal is by physically acting on the world.
Wait, so if I predict I am looking at my cat on my desk, but I get a prediction error, meaning maybe the visual data is just a blurry smudge, I don't sit there recalculating a new statistical model of the universe.
No, you literally just move your head, squint your eyes, and physically bring the cat into focus.
You force the world to conform to your expectation.
Precisely. Perception and action are no longer separate departments in the brain. They are locked in what the literature calls a circular causal embrace.
A circular causal embrace. I love that phrasing.
It's very poetic for science, right? But it means you don't perceive the world in order to act. You act in order to perceive.
The text mentions the gannet seabird as a prime example of this, which I found totally fascinating. But I need you to break down how this bird is actually proving the radical model.
The gannet is a beautiful illustration of this because of how it hunts. So it feeds by plunge diving into the ocean at incredible speeds.
Like a missile.
Literally.
Yeah.
And to survive the impact, it has to fold its wings back at the exact right millisecond before hitting the water.
Right.
Now, if it relied on conservative predictive processing, that bird's brain would have to calculate its velocity, wind resistance, altitude, and compute a complex 3D mental model of the ocean to predict the exact time to impact.
Which will require a massive amount of computational power. Like, bird brains are smart, but they aren't supercomputers.
Massive. But the radical view points out that the gannet doesn't do any of that math. It relies on a singular, incredibly simple visual cue, which is the optical flow.
Okay, optical flow.
Specifically, the relative rate of expansion of the image of the water on its retina. As the water gets bigger in its vision at a specific threshold, the wings fold.
So it's not doing calculus.
No. The bird isn't building a model, it is just acting on a specific environmental trigger.
It outsources the math to the physics of the real world.
And it does that because of a fundamental law of biology, frugality. The brain has an endemic drive to maintain the organism's viability at the absolute minimal energetic cost. Thinking is biologically expensive.
Yeah, it burns calories.
Exactly. Physical action, paradoxically, reduces computational complexity. What's fascinating here is how radical predictive processing fundamentally redefines what a prediction error actually is.
Right, it changes the whole definition.
It is no longer just unexplained data sitting in a spreadsheet. Prediction error is now defined as sensory information that has not yet been leveraged to guide apt action. It is a biological imperative to move.
It's like an alarm bell saying, do something.
Yeah.
But, reading through the comments section on Andy Clark's blog post, it's super clear that a lot of scientists don't think he took this radical shift far enough. You have thinkers in there like Jello Brunenberg, Julian Keverstein, and Jacob Howie getting into this really intense debate.
Oh yeah, they were not holding back.
Not at all. They are pushing for something they call really radical predictive processing.
The really radical camp takes this logic to its absolute extreme. They argue we should completely abandon the idea that the brain uses internal models or representations of any kind.
Like zero models.
Zero. They view the organism through a purely cybernetic ecological lens. In their view, the organism doesn't predict specific content. It doesn't predict a coffee cup. It simply strives for an optimal grip on its environment.
Okay, wait, how does that work without any internal representation? Like, how do I grab the cup if I don't have a model of it?
Well, they argue that when we experience a prediction error, we aren't detecting a flaw in a mental model. We're experiencing a state of physical disattunement with our environment. Yes, it's a physical friction. And we naturally act to reduce that friction, to get back into tune. The environment offers affordances, which are opportunities for action, and we just fluidly respond to them.
Okay, the comment section uses this brilliant toy car analogy to explain this smooth coping. I have to bring this up.
Oh, a wind-up car. Yes.
Yeah, so they describe a cheap wind-up toy car, but it has a single unpowered wheel mounted sideways on its underbelly. If you wind this car up and set it on a table, it drives straight toward the edge.
Heading for disaster.
Right. But as soon as the front wheels drop off the edge, the front of the car dips. That makes the sideways belly wheel touch the table. Because the wheel is sideways, the forward momentum instantly pivots the car away from the edge.
It's so simple.
The front wheels pop back onto the table, and it drives safely away.
It achieves survival without a single line of code.
That's the crazy part. The car has no sensors. It doesn't compute prediction errors. It definitely doesn't have an internal representation of the table. Its physical morphology, like its actual body shape, solves the problem automatically. The structure of its body handles the cognition.
It is the ultimate example of achieving optimal grip purely through physical form.
But I have to push back here because this is the exact scale-up objection that Andy Clark himself wrestles with.
Yes, the scale-up problem.
Right. A toy car pivoting away from a ledge doesn't need to think.
Oh.
But human life isn't just not falling off tables. I can't play an expert game of chess or, plan for my retirement using the same mechanics as a wind-up toy. You can't explain all of human cognition with just real-time physical reflexes.
Well, a truly hardcore radical and activist might argue with you there.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they would say that even playing chess is just a very high-level form of smooth coping with a structured symbolic environment. They view cultural rules the same way they view physical ledges.
Wait, they think chess is just a complex reflex.
Some do. But this is exactly where Andy Clark draws the line, and he defends the necessity of internal representations. He concedes the scale-up objection. And the text points to researchers like Adrian Downey who look at things like obsessive-compulsive disorder through this lens.
Oh, that's true.
Because if you are entirely governed by real-time reflexes, how do you explain someone driven to perform rituals based on abstract fears of future contamination?
Right, the contamination isn't physically there right now.
Exactly. So Clark's compromise is that while simple organisms or toy cars don't compute predictions, complex humans living in multi-level environments do rely on hierarchical internal models.
Because we have to predict things that are invisible or things that haven't happened yet.
Precisely. We need deeper temporal depth. But Clark's caveat is that these hierarchical models are still fundamentally action-oriented. They aren't building a passive picture. They are mapping out complex future action possibilities.
Which brings us to this realization that if the brain is relying on the body's physical shape and the environment's structure to solve complex problems, it kind of forces us to ask a much larger question.
Where does the mind actually stop?
Yes. If the body is doing the thinking, does the environment do the thinking too? That causality is what drives us into the broader framework of inactivism.
And inactivism is the massive umbrella over all of this. It's rooted in the foundational work of thinkers like Francisco Varela, Evan Thompson, Eleanor Roche, and Humberto Maturana. The core thesis of inactivism is that cognition doesn't happen in an organism. It arises through the interaction between an acting organism and its environment. We don't parachute into a pre-given world.
We bring forth or enact our world through our interactions.
Exactly.
To make this concrete, the philosopher Mark Rowlands broke inactivism down into the 4 E's of cognition. He says the mind is embodied, embedded, enacted, and extended. But we probably need to explain how these 4 actually function together, not just list them.
Yeah, let's use the philosopher Alvin Noe's work on 3D perception to show how they interlock. Think about looking at a tomato.
Okay, tomato.
Your retinas are essentially flat, 2D screens. So how do you perceive a solid 3D tomato when you can only ever see the front of it?
I mean, a conservative view would say the brain computes a 3D model from the 2D data, right?
Right. But Noe argues your perception of solidity comes from your sensor-motor expectations. Your mind is embodied, meaning you have a physical neck and eyes. You are embedded in a spatial relationship with that tomato. And you enact your perception because you implicitly know that if you move your head slightly to the left, the visual profile of the tomato will change in a specific, predictable way.
So my potential to move creates the 3D shape in my mind.
Exactly. Your implicit grasp of how you can physically interact with the object is what gives it 3D solidity.
Now, the sources note Andy Clark has a minor critique of Noe here, suggesting the brain still does some sensor-motor summarizing rather than relying purely on real-time movement. But the core agreement is undeniable. Perception is an active physical exploration.
Another crucial element is how the mind is extended, which brings us to Daniel Hutto's concept of the human hand.
Oh, this part blew my mind.
In an inactive framework, your hand isn't a dumb piece of hardware waiting for software commands from the brain. Hutto argues the hand is literally an organ of cognition.
An organ of cognition, that is wild.
A lifetime of grasping objects, manipulating tools, and feeling textures means the physical structure of your hand actually shapes the concepts your brain is capable of forming.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because if you take the 4 E's together, the old brain as a computer metaphor just completely collapses.
Yeah.
To me, inactivism makes the mind sound much more like a jazz band.
The jazz. Okay, untack that for me.
Well, think about where the music actually lives. The music doesn't exist solely in the sheet music, and it doesn't exist solely inside the physical instruments, right?
Right.
The music only comes into existence through the active, real-time, improvised interplay between the musicians' bodies, the physical properties of their instruments, and the acoustic feedback of the room they are sitting in. The mind isn't a thing. The mind is the performance.
That is a phenomenal way to visualize it. The mind is the dynamic performance between brain, body, and world. But crucially, you're rarely playing a solo,
Very true.
which opens up the social and educational implications of inactivism.
Because we are constantly jamming with other people.
And that changes the nature of cognition entirely. Researchers Honda Jager and Ezekiel DePaulo introduced a concept called participatory sense-making. Usually we think of a conversation as two separate brains tossing packets of data back and forth. But in the inactive view, the social interaction itself takes on its own autonomy.
Wait, how does an interaction have autonomy? Like a life of its own?
Yeah. Think about the last time you were in a genuinely awkward conversation with someone. Neither of you planned for it to be awkward. Neither of you wanted it to.
Oh, definitely. We've all been there.
But the rhythm of the pauses, the body language, the shared environment, the interaction itself became this heavy third entity in the room that both of you suddenly had to manage and react to. You weren't just exchanging data, you were co-constructing a shared reality in real time, and that shared reality started steering you.
Wow. And when you scale participatory sense-making up across millions of people over time, you get culture. The cultural psychologists Beervelt and Verhegen argue in their sources that our shared reality isn't just a socially agreed-upon map of a pre-existing world. We literally manufacture our world out of meaning, not just sterile information.
We enact our culture through our physical practices and rituals. And this insight radically transforms how we should approach education, as the psychologist Jerome Bruner pointed out. Bruner contrasted symbolic learning, which is reading abstract rules from a textbook, with an active representation, which is learning by physical doing.
This makes so much intuitive sense when you apply it to how you, the listener, learn any physical skill. It's why you can read a textbook on the physics of riding a bicycle 100 times over. You can memorize the gyroscopic forces and the exact angles of the handlebars.
But you still won't know how to ride.
Exactly. You will not actually know how to ride a bike until you get on the seat, push the pedals, experience the physical disattunement of falling over, and let your body enact the balance. Your physical engagement isn't a byproduct of learning, it is the learning itself.
This raises an important question, though, and it's one of the heaviest critiques leveled against inactivism in the literature.
Okay, what's the critique?
If cognition is just this physical coupling with the environment, how do biological systems generate actual meaning? Critics look at inactivism and ask, at what point does a complex physical reflex become a genuine, intentional thought? Where does meaning come from if we are just wind-up cars avoiding ledges?
Yeah, how do the inactivists respond to that? That feels like a huge gap.
They point to biological autopoiesis, which is the drive to self-create and survive. They argue that meaning stems natively from the fact that we are precarious biological organisms that can die.
Stakes. We have stakes.
Exactly. And AI can process 1 billion prediction errors, but it doesn't care because its physical existence isn't at stake. For a living organism, the environment matters because maintaining our physical boundary matters. But the mechanics of how pure physical survival translates into abstract intentionality, well, that remains a hotly debated frontier.
It is a massive philosophical rabbit hole. So what does this all mean for us on a practical level? Let's trace the arc of what we've explored today. We started by tearing down the exhausting idea that your brain is a passive statistician locked in a dark room trying to compute a perfect mirror of reality.
Right, and we replaced that statistician with an action-oriented, frugality-obsessed organism, a creature that uses physical movement to literally force the world to match its predictions.
We saw how the gannet seabird uses the physical expansion of water on its retina to trigger a dive, completely bypassing complex math. We saw how a toy car can solve a maze just by the physical shape of its wheels. And we explored the 4 E's, the profound realization that your mind is embodied, embedded, enacted, and extended.
Which means every time you reach across your desk to pick up a cup of coffee, it isn't just your brain issuing a command. Your physical hand, the weight of the ceramic cup, and the spatial layout of your desk are actively participating in your cognitive process. Your mind is out there, in your hand, intertwining with the cup.
It really is a beautiful, expansive way to look at human existence.
Yeah.
But as we wrap up, it leaves me with a final, slightly terrifying thought for you to chew on.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. If inactivism is right, if our minds are literally physically extended into our environments, built on robust physical actions, complex sensoromotor feedback, and dynamic social interactions, what happens to the human mind when our environment aggressively shrinks?
You mean our modern digital environments?
Exactly. Think about your smartphone. What happens to your cognition when your primary environment shrinks to a 6-inch glowing rectangle?
Oh, wow.
When your primary physical action in the world for 5 or 6 hours a day is reduced to the micro movement of a single thumb scrolling across a flat sheet of glass?
Yeah.
If we bring forth our reality through our physical interactions, what kind of limited, flat, impoverished reality is your brain actually enacting when it's trapped in a scroll?
If the body shapes the mind, that is a profound physical limitation we are placing on ourselves.
It's definitely something to think about the next time you pick up your phone. Or, better yet, the next time you decide to leave it on the table, step outside, and actually go enact a wider world. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us today. We'll see you out there.